I think this is a really great panel to kick things off because this is exactly what we were trying to describe and talk about with moving beyond just technology for technology's sake. And this is about creating that human-centric community. So I would like to welcome and bring up to the stage Lucia Athens, who's the Chief Sustainability Officer of Austin, the city of Austin, our neighbor to the north here, and Douglas Melnick, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer of San Antonio, and Miguel Gamino, who is the Executive Vice President for Global Cities at MasterCard. Thank you all for joining me on the stage. And sort of to kick this conversation off, we've got some really, we're here in San Antonio. Doug, thank you so much for hosting. We've got the perspective of Austin with Lucia and a global perspective through you, Miguel. Why would we want to create a human-centered city? And ultimately, when we do that, what could that achieve? Why don't we start with you, Lucia?
Okay, great. Great to be here. Thank you. Well, I mean, cities are where all the people are, right? To begin with. But I think a lot of times when we're thinking about these forward solutions and a lot of things, solutions around sustainability, we tend to get very focused on the environmental benefits and we forget about all of the benefits we're going to get, co-benefits we often call them, to the human populations that inhabit the cities that we're working in. So one really simple example would be bicycling. We want to reduce congestion in our cities. We want to get people in alternate modes of transportation. Biking is one of those. And if you get on a bike, not only are you helping with congestion, but you're improving your own human health, and you're lowering your stress, and you're probably going to be happier as well as healthier overall. So, and there's going to be better air quality. So that's just one of those co-benefit examples. A lot of the conservation strategies are going to yield cost savings. So while there might be some incremental costs initially for some of the things that we're trying to do to address climate change or conserve water or address the energy-water nexus, we're going to lower people's utility bills ultimately. And a lot of those solutions have very short payback periods. So I'm always looking for a way to talk about what are the human benefits and the co-benefits that we're going to get along with sustainability, along with conservation, along with preparing for climate change.
Thank you, Lucia. Doug, what about yourself? Why should we be focused on creating those human-centered cities?
I think to build on what Lucia was talking about and what Paula had mentioned, we have a pretty significant planning effort going on right now. SA Climate Ready, our climate action and adaptation plan, and it's a big step for San Antonio. And when you start looking at what those impacts are, when you start looking at long-term climate projections, 110-degree days, more than 100 days over 100 degrees by end of century. I mean, that's a lot to take in. And so the challenge is really translating this into what our citizens understand and appreciate. So again, it's about quality of life. We're talking about walkability. When we survey our community, consistently mobility options is at the top of the list. It's not about reducing greenhouse gases. It's about being able to get from point A to point B as easily and effectively as possible. And it happens to improve air quality. It happens to help spur economic development. So I think it's taking these big ecological, environmental issues and then bringing it down to the human scale, as Lucia was mentioning. I think big discussions with the business community about what the implications are of this climate plan. And when you start hearing terms like zero net energy, you start hearing terms about 100% carbon-free travel, even though we're looking at 2040, 2050, trying to translate it into efficient business practices, saving money. Again, what is important to our citizens.
Thanks, Doug.
Can I just add on to that really quick?
Please.
I just wanted to say, Doug and I have been talking about this, of course, and understanding that there's comment period happening now with the climate plan here, but I just wanted to add that one of the things we've been excited about in Austin with the implementation of our community climate plan is that in roughly a 3-year period, our GDP went up by a significant percent, by 52%. Our population rose about 10%, and our carbon footprint went down 7%. So I think it's just really important for people to understand that you don't have to lose economically to advance these climate initiatives.
I think that's such an important point, and obviously San Antonio and Austin are two of the fastest growing cities in the country, and so how you create, and we're going to talk about this throughout this conversation, but how you create that sustainable community even as you're growing is an important caveat. I'd like to bring you into this conversation, Miguel. You know, talking, you have this global perspective. Why is it important, not only here in our backyard of Texas, but how can cities around the world create more human-friendly, human-centric places to live, work, and raise a family?
Yeah, so to paint a little more color on the perspective that I can share, I'm actually spent the last 8 years in public service. So I was the CIO of my hometown, El Paso, Texas. So I'm a Texan. Despite the fact I came from New York City last night, I am a Texan. Once and always, right? So I was the CIO of El Paso, I was the CIO of San Francisco, and I was the CTO of New York City until just recently. And the reason that I think is relevant to the conversation is I'm now with MasterCard pursuing how to scale impact globally, but it's rooted in 8 years I spent in public service.
Right.
Understanding the answer, learning, frankly, how to be very empathetic to the point you're raising. And the reason I describe it that way is, you know, I learned that all of the opportunity that exists on the other end of the types of things we're going to talk about here, I'm a bit concerned that if we're not really intentionally thinking about people and people in an inclusive manner, then we're going to continue to create more and more progress for some people at the expense of some other people. And so what we've talked about a lot at each of my stops along the public service path, and now globally, is how do we make sure that we do realize the possibilities of protecting our planet, and the possibilities of, you know, job growth and job creation, and the possibilities of better, more sustainable, more functional mobility services, but doing it in a way that is not at the expense of some people is the real hard part. If we thought it was hard enough to try to save the planet, trying to do so while thinking of everybody on the planet is even more difficult, but I would argue more important. And so I think being human-centered is important, but qualifying it very carefully to say being inclusively human-centered is even more important. And so, you know, really engaging with the community and understanding what their real needs are and the real impacts of, say, scooters on some people's lives and the maybe unintended consequences on other people's lives. I'm all for them. I personally love them. Yeah. I think they're a great addition to a multimodal mobility kind of ecosystem. But to be very thoughtful, and an example of that is, you know, parking them on sidewalks is an issue for some people who might be visibly impaired and whatnot. And that, because of an engagement between the cities and the industry, there are some new solutions being developed now where they geo-fence where they ought to be parked. And that's a fairly simple tweak, but a very fundamental, impactful one to make sure that those scooters can help the people that they're intended to help without being a detriment to some other people of the community. So just as one very pointed example. And then to bring it back to the point about, I call it the triple win. Things can be in better service to people at benefit to the city and economically and financially, commercially viable. And that was, you know, when I was originally a startup guy and then in public service, as I described, and now I'm back in the private sector. So it's kind of my job to merge those things and find ways that we can do well by doing good. Is not just a slogan on a wall, it's what we live and breathe with our company. And applying that to cities is maybe the best opportunity to exercise it, because we can find solutions that impact the goals positively that we're after. I used to argue, you know, I worked for a mayor in a couple of cities that has an interesting relationship with the private sector, we'll put it that way. And even in those city halls, I used to tell them, Getting the private sector engaged in many ways is the way to protect the impact we're trying to have. Because if we make it commercially viable, then the private sector will care for it when we're no longer in office. And so I think it's really important to bring those things together. And the last point I'll make is that from a MasterCard perspective, and this is not a commercial, this is just an invitation, frankly, we're building this global platform to identify these opportunities to share between cities. Because I think all the things that are happening in Austin and San Antonio are attempting to solve challenges that I'm seeing, to your question about global, are the exact same issues that are trying to be solved in Bogota, Colombia, or Wallandilly outside of Sydney in Australia, or Dubai, frankly. And there's a lot, I call it the 80-20 rule, right? Or I use the 80-20 rule. There's 80% of things that are almost cut and paste. A lot of cities trying to solve many of the same things for the people that live there or visit. And there's an element that needs to be customized, but there's a lot that can be shared. That might be the only way that cities, governments in general, can catch up with the pace of change of consumer expectations and the realities of climate change and the realities of concerns in urban centers, and the fact that 55% of people live in urban centers today. That's projected to be 70% by 2050 by the UN. But it's also where 70% of CO2 comes from urban centers globally. It's also where 80% of the GDP is generated globally. So it's where people are and growing. It's where the problems are, frankly, but it's also where the economics are to potentially solve those issues. So that's where I think if we're smart and involve the community in particular ways, I think we can find those solutions that positively move all of those needles, not just some of them.
That's a great point, Miguel, and I'm glad that you brought Wallandilly, New South Wales, into this conversation. Even though we have 3 Texans up on the stage, having that global perspective is great. And I think what the 3 of you have done have really eloquently laid out the foundational elements of this. That this is about long-term sustainability, tackling those major challenges that are related to providing energy for a growing population, providing clean, drinkable water for a growing population, providing transportation and healthcare and education. But that key point about expanding accessibility is central to this, because it cannot just be for the haves and the we cannot create a society of haves and have-nots more than we already do have right now. So to bring that back to this conversation, we've touched a little bit about technology. How is technology, how are digital tools helping to tackle some of those challenges of accessibility, energy sustainability, community sustainability? Let's start with you, Lucia.
Sure. Well, I think it's an interesting question because some of the pre-conversation that we had before the session, just to prepare, the issue of the digital divide came up.
Yes.
And I think the number that was quoted for San Antonio was a pretty big number for the digital divide. I didn't know what it was for Austin, so I went and reached out to my people and got an answer. And we have very little digital divide in Austin. Perhaps not surprising, because we are a very young community and we're very focused on tech, and we have so many new people coming in. But we have like 95% of our population is connected to the internet, and I think about 92% have smartphones. So
Right.
That was very interesting for me to learn. It was reassuring for me because it's difficult if you have a big digital divide and you want to rely on digital tools. What do you do there? We actually have invested in a couple of different digital tools to reach people where they are, and we're always trying to figure out how to reach people that are not like the choir. The sustainability hardcore people are already doing everything. And how do I reach people that don't think about, maybe they don't have time to think about because they're working 2 jobs, or they don't have the resources to make different choices, and they don't really even know what their options are. So we created a tool, it's called Rethink Austin, and it's a free app that you can download, that it's basically a game tool to green your lifestyle, and you can earn badges. So we basically, rely on that whole competitive spirit, and it hooks up to social media, and we stage challenges to get people to change their behavior and take the bus, or weatherize their home, or bike, or bring their own cup. They're simple things, But some of those are sort of like almost like the gateway drug into sustainability. You get into it and you get really excited. So we stage these competitions using that tool, which have been quite successful. We've had them in the business community and also with school children. And then we also have some tours that we basically created, some self-guided tours of sustainable neighborhoods in Austin using another app called Travel Stories. So those have been really useful platforms for us because, for instance, in our office, we're a fairly small office. We only can reach so many people face to face, so we really need to find the digital tools. The last thing I'll say, for us in our own building portfolio, we're using smart gauges, e-gauges. We have a staff person who's been able to create some utility platforms for our building managers to help them understand better what's happening with their buildings. Just recently, we were able to save the Parks Department $32,000 on a water bill that they didn't realize that their gauge was malfunctioning. So, there are a lot of tools like that are really quick and dirty that we can just come in and kind of layer them on top of what's already there.
Well, and that goes back to the Miguel's point about doing well, doing good to do well, or exactly. Do well by doing good. Thank you, because you've simultaneously saved the city money, $32,000, but you've also conserved water in doing that, using that smart technology. Doug, Lucia mentioned the digital divide, and I'm from Detroit, and like San Antonio, we have a tremendous digital divide. How does that play into your and San Antonio's approach to creating the sustainable community, but also using some of this technology to advance the overall objectives of the city?
Right, and so when one of our big objectives is around engagement, and you talk about the digital divide, and I think, and I've been doing sustainability and planning for about 16, 17 years now, and sometimes we tend to use technology as a crutch when we start trying to engage. We'll use social media, we'll send emails out, and I always tell my staff and others that nothing beats going into neighborhoods and talking with people. You get insights that you'd never know. Through our climate planning process, we had somebody who was out, met a homeless individual, and their number one concern was there's no water fountains outside of downtown. So I think when we start looking at technology, taking it with a grain of salt, that it's only going to get you so far. That being said, using technology for transparency purposes, we have a dashboard that's basically for decision makers and the general public to track our sustainability metrics, just to see what's going on, and also provides a platform for people to engage in the city process. Like Austin, using technology for our own city buildings, we have an energy revolving fund that we continually improve efficiency in our buildings, capture those savings, and put them right back into our fund. And we always struggle with more technology to have real-time results for what's going on in those buildings, because when you don't know what's going on, that's when you have to come back 6 months later and you've already are behind the curve. The micro-mobility issue that you raised was really, I was sitting there thinking the same thing, making sure that as we see these technological advancements come in, that we're looking at those potential consequences. They're great tools, but at what point do they become a challenge and a nuisance? And so that's part of one of the key components of our climate plan is it includes an equity framework. And we're starting to get pushback on that because it forces us to ask tough questions. The key to that is before we go from point A to point B, whether it's a new technology, whether it's a new policy or program, we're supposed to take a step and just ask a series of questions, working with different equity stakeholders across the community to make sure that we're considering that whether it's a new technology or something that we are really thinking through that it's not going to have some sort of negative impact. So I think I've been here for 5 years. I came here from upstate New York. It's completely different in 5 years. I don't even recognize it. And when we start talking about, I think one of the biggest areas of concern in San Antonio is the city's changing. what does it mean for affordability? What does it mean for the community that has been here for generations? And how do we make sure that they're not left behind? And I don't think we've figured that out yet. And I think that's why there's so much concern in the community, that when you talk about the city of tomorrow, how does it work for all San Antonians?
Yeah, I'm not sure, and maybe Miguel, you'll chime in on this, but I'm not sure anybody's figured out exactly how to create that totally accessible city that engenders growth, engenders economic development, but also makes sure that the less financially well-off parts of the community don't get left behind. You talked about, in your opening remarks, a little bit about the 80-20 rule. Every city is different, but every city has some of those same challenges. So I'm interested what you're seeing, in your time in San Francisco, New York, or globally, what you're seeing are some of those best digital tools that can help address those pertinent challenges that cities are facing.
The truth is, it's really not like there's these 5 tools, and if you just use those, then you'll be the smart city.
Right.
And you'll get the badge, and you can put it on your website. And
everybody's going to move to your city, and you get all these accolades.
Right. First of all, the term is, personally, I use it as infrequently as humanly possible.
And we've consciously done that as well. We don't want to just refer to things as a smart city.
Because smart city would kind of insinuate that it's a destination, that once you achieve it, then you get that seal on your website, and then you're done. And rather, it's a journey. And frankly speaking, not to bruise the egos of all the people in this room, me included, but cities have been on this path long before we were born.
Sure.
Cities have been innovating and using technology and trying to serve better and deliver solutions better since they were born.
Right.
Right? So let's not kid ourselves and think that, we're in this era of smart city or technological advancement. Now, all that being said, I think everything that's been stated is what is important, and it's particularly the last point. I want to tell actually a couple stories to kind of further that point. In New York City, one thing we did was we went into the most disadvantaged community in Brooklyn called Brownsville. In Brownsville is the place where you still don't go out after dark. It's literally it's the place you read about. It's still there. New York is the safest it's ever been. True. That life reality still exists in this particular neighborhood. And that's not, there are neighborhoods in cities in Texas and everywhere that unfortunately still have that reality. But we went into that neighborhood, and we didn't go in with any technology badge on our shirt and just asked, what are your concerns? And their concerns weren't, I need better access to the internet. Their concerns were, my kid is having trouble competing in school, which translated to, they need better internet as part of the solution. Their concerns were having access to healthy food. Their concerns were management of waste, particularly in public housing. So they weren't asking for technology. They were asking for improvement of quality of life and their reality. So that was the first, important moment. So then we engaged with them, and this is not to suggest this is easy. This is hard, and it requires tough questions, and it's a different level of investment of time and energy and willpower and political will and all these things. But what we ended up with, in particular, the story I want to tell on waste management, was we issued a challenge to the industry after we had defined the challenge with the community. So we had talked to them about what it was that we're really facing and used that to define the challenge, so that when the community saw that challenge issued to the industry, they realized that this was on their behalf. It wasn't separate and apart from, it wasn't some smart people who think they're smart trying to build a solution for them. They were really invested in it. Really important point number one. Second, we got the question not perfect, but better than we would have had it had we not involved them. Thirdly, when we got the solutions, we got technological solutions. We got things like on-site composting solutions and things like that. We helped the community better understand their problem by use of data and identifying that the majority of the waste coming out of public housing was compostable. They didn't know that. So there was a partnership where we helped them understand the source of the issues better, or the potential solutions. Anyway, so long story short, the technology that was, the tool that was presented to us by the industry was you could compost on site. Okay, but there was a bunch of other issues that had to be dealt with. The end result was the community handled collection, which was an issue, and motivating people to separate. But then they would compost on site and then manage the composting process and then have an economically viable product at the end that they could sell. So not only did we solve waste, or were we not solve, we didn't solve it, but we were headed towards a solution to better manage waste in public housing. We were also creating economic opportunity for the people that lived there. That would have never occurred had we not invested in that really tough, messy conversation with them and make them part of, make it us, not us and them. And separately, I think in other parts of the world, we're finding ways to use data to help service delivery improve in a way that is beneficial to people. We did a pilot in Chicago, very, very simple kind of experiment almost, to say if we could understand public transit ridership after an event, in this case at Wrigley Field, and could give people, they would opt in, but we could give people incentive to maybe wait for the next train. Could we positively impact the demand and flatten the demand? That sounds pretty novel. With this very, very simple, we didn't do any big marketing or anything like that. Very, very simple rollout of the experiment. We impacted that ridership or that peak impact by 18%. What that translates to for the transit agency is maybe they don't need to put another train on the track. Maybe they don't need, there's a whole bunch of efficiency gains.
The knock-on effects.
Right, the efficiency gains for the government. The ridership experience was measurably better. And the local economy outside the ballpark, because those incentives were have a cup of coffee or have a beer or whatever. And if you're not in a hurry, don't rush to the train. Stop and enjoy a beverage, basically.
Sure. See Wrigleyville,
Right.
see that community.
So to that point, you can find creatively working together, and this is the superpower of collaboration is what I call it, can help you find those triple wins where the government stands to gain in its attempt to deliver the service, the public gains by having a better experience, and the business community gains by having positive economic impact.
So as we're thinking about this, I mean, this goes back to that idea of listening. To have outcome-driven innovation, we need to listen, whether it's to the data or going out into the community and actually asking people what they need to help make their lives measurably better. As we tie that into sustainability, access, mobility, what are some of those key data points that Austin is looking at capturing so that they can make sure that their community stays vibrant and active and well distributed?
Well, one example is something that we're actually going to be working on as part of the American Cities Climate Challenge, which both San Antonio and Austin were selected for, funded by Bloomberg Philanthropies, and that's dynamic parking pricing, which basically says that we'd be pulling data real time about what's happening with parking and increasing or decreasing parking at different times to try to drive behavior. The other piece that we've been working on related to that is parking wayfinding. So, we have a limited amount of parking and people just circle and circle and circle and,
I've done
their
that,
emissions
yeah.
go up. Right, you don't have a whole lot of choice. So with wayfinding using smart tools, it can guide you to where that parking place is so that you're not circling a lot. So there's a lot can be done with the mobility piece. We're also very interested in, haven't necessarily made much progress on, but this is where those partnerships and the collaboration is really going to be necessary. Integrated mobility data. So if I want to make a trip, but I can't get there all the way on the bus, or part of the trip is going to be required for me to walk or to get a bike share or a scooter, can I plan that entire trip and pay for it in one place?
Yep.
Because it's the disaggregation of all those different tools that creates kind of a barrier. It's too confusing, it's too hard, and I don't want to figure all that out. So a smart tool can do that for me. I did want to build on something that you said on a slightly kind of circling back, if I may. I really appreciate so much all the conversation, bringing in equity and kind of the human connections. And one of the places I feel like that I've been very excited to see in Austin as an example of where we've really been able to kind of break down the divide is in our public library system. Our new central library, which is LEED Platinum, which is an amazing project designed by Lake Flato here in San Antonio. But what's more amazing about it to me is that it's become a very public living room for our city. It's a place where everybody can go to get Wi-Fi. We have a tech petting zoo where you can go try out all kinds of 3D printers and things that you might not, be able to afford. You can check out tablets and laptops for use while you're in the computer in the library. You can get these amazing views of downtown from our green roof that a lot of people that can afford to live in high-rise condos downtown get those views, but other people don't necessarily get those views. And then the last piece, which to me is another place where we have to figure out how to interact with people face-to-face and not just rely on technology, is just the whole issue about how much homeless people use libraries, how much they are valid, user populations of those facilities, and how librarians are more and more becoming social service worker providers, and just all the challenges associated with that. And just really quick, there's a movie that's going to be coming out in April. I got a sneak preview of it yesterday called The Public by Emilio Estevez, and it's all about public libraries and how important it is to have places like that in our cities where we all come together and we actually get to see and interact and be human with people that might not be like us, that might be from different circumstances, or they might speak different languages. And the more isolated we become in our cities, that presents a lot of challenges for us, even understanding the communities that we live in.
That's a great point. At Z-Prime, we love the Austin City Library, and for those people that haven't had a chance to check it out, it's just a wonderful place. We do a lot of collaboration there, so it's a great spot. Doug, I want to bring you back in the conversation, and Miguel as well. We've only got a couple minutes left, but as you're looking at data and you're looking forward into the future, how can San Antonio, how can global cities use that data to create that city of the future, that sustainable community?
So one of the things that we're working on and working with CPS Energy, our Office of Innovation, is basically a smart streetlight project. Again, what technology can we integrate into these streetlights? And one of the things we're really excited about is air quality sensors, basically temperature gauges, so we can start mapping at the granular level air quality and urban heat island. And so how does this help us make strategic interventions? And again, it's working with those most vulnerable neighborhoods. Where are those folks who are waiting out for a bus or walking to services where they need a tree-lined street? Where do we need to really focus on those areas of poorest air quality in relationship to asthma rates? So I think it's trying to use technology to help improve people's lives.
That's a great point. Just really quickly, when Detroit was in the process of our revitalization, putting smart street lights and LED street bulbs in those street lights has really helped improve community safety too, a major impact. What about you, Miguel? Last thoughts here?
Yeah, so I think data and insights in particular, right? Because people throw around data and decision makers often don't know what to do with, wouldn't know what to do with the raw data set if you handed it to them. Insights are the part that's really important in influencing the decision making and understanding better the cause and effect of policy decisions and administrative decisions. So I think really better understanding the cause and effect and maybe the unintended consequences of good intentive actions, right? So that's one thing. From a global perspective, what we're doing with City Possible is bringing as many cities together as possible in this network. We announced 16 globally at the end of last year. We're about to announce here in the state of Texas, actually, another set of cities. So this nucleus of collaboration is growing quickly, but it's also a network of private sector partners, academics, and NGOs to all be in support of that network. And the reason that City Possible network is so important is that all of the stuff that's been discussed in the good projects and initiatives and ideas right here in the great state of Texas are, I'm telling you, are relevant and valuable and applicable in every other language in every other part of the world. And so if we can help accelerate that global progress by bringing those cities into a conversation globally and helping facilitate that, that's part of the mission. And I think data will help those cities identify how those solutions are cross-applicable, because there are also challenges that this community and the other cities of Texas are facing that might have been solved or are being materially worked on in other parts of the world. So that sharing principle is super important, and data helps unlock that value.
Thank you all for sharing your thoughts, your experiences. This has been a great conversation, and I strongly encourage people to come up and ask questions afterwards in the networking session. Thank you all for this great panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.